3776. I think a lot of people have concerns on scope. Every portion of everything on the website, every email correspondence about scope seems to say it's not a big deal, there's nothing we can do about it, nothing in their current contract limits scope, they can still do it. However, if that's the case, then why the company open it? Why do they want more flexibility? And why, if you guys said earlier about 1115, Pat said that if we reopen the scope TA, that would cause significant delay. They want it for a reason. And everybody knows that the company puts wording in the contracts for a reason. There is a benefit. And personally, the argument of they can't, well, these are all our jobs, there's not enough lift and all that other stuff. Well, obviously there's not right now, but they want flexibility. The whole drive initiative, unfortunately, seems to be an appropriate word. If they start shifting a lot of our freight movement to driving it in trucks, and they do a number of different things, it seems like flexibility as they right-size us into a much smaller, you even said, how big of a pay force do they want us to be? How big of an airline do they want us to be? It seems like they're shifting a lot of things. And actually the current scope language, I'm not a lawyer, I wasn't here for years, I wasn't dealing with other things, other companies, other freight movers that don't exist anymore. But the current language says they shall not, based on whether they shall not do more than what they're anticipating. However, they miscalculate more or less, I'm paraphrasing, then here's the penalty, they shall not. This current language says they may. And I understand that the purpose of my union, I've been in a union for all 13 months now, I got no experience, but the purpose of the union I would think is to represent the pilots. So I was thinking, in the past, there shall not, hasn't been challenged enough. But if they start doing it on a bigger scale, I think the NBC would be forced to actually take the company to task, because now all of a sudden they ratcheted up their volume on a web leasing in a lot more major way. And losing the shall not language and turning into a may language with, okay, here's the penalties. I mean, if they got rid of, according to your calculations, if they got rid of 100,000 block hours, that's 1/7 of our flying next year, that would be a penalty of $182 million for the company. That seems like a lot, but you guys also just said, if we delay ratifying this contract, we'll lose $70 million a month. So that's just over 2.5 months. I don't see how giving them added flexibility is anything that we're interested in whatsoever. And I understand the parasite drag equation, and I get that. I want a contract, I just got off my first year pay, I'm in debt because of it, I got 7 children, I want my pay to come up. 2 of them in college. I want my pay to come up. I was really hopeful for this. But guess what? A $3.8 billion contract assumes that our pilot group is going to all retire with this job. And if we don't all get to retire with this job, or we get seat-locked because the company downsized and I'm in the right seat indefinitely, I don't think that $3.8 billion is what I'm going to feel like I've got.
Thanks, Will. Thanks, I appreciate it. Look, I mean, we clearly understand, everybody understands, the fear that the company has introduced because of their restructuring. That was the reason we did these things, was to kind of put an actual piece of paper in hand that you can say, all right, the union's dealing with my expectation on a career delay or expected career delay now. But the fear is extremely challenging to kind of overcome, especially when we're dealing with ratifying a tentative agreement. And there's been some speculation out there about what the company could do under the current language versus what they can do today. But what you asked specifically was Well, why would they wanna do what they did in scope? And we saw this consistently in everything they did. In every single section they opened, they had one key driver, and that was to save every single penny. As small and as minor as it was, they wanted to pick up every nickel because they knew they were on the hook. And we came in clear of what the contract goal was, and that was retirement. And they had a pretty good expectation of what that was going to look like based off of our 2018 discussion. So they went out of their way, and that's why we had such a hard time in the back and forth at the table. We literally fought for weeks over per diem, and we were fighting, and the initial numbers, it was staggering to us how much they were fighting. And Rich mentioned how much we went after trying to get just a State Department attachment on our per diem. Ultimately, we got 2. But that's because every penny is exceptionally important to them today, now in light of all their balance sheet savings that they're trying to put in place. What they saw was in the scope language an ability to save some money. And the penalty calculation saves them some money, the way that's calculated now. What it does for all of us, for every pilot now, there's not a pilot in this room, including some of us up here at the table, that can take the current penalty structure and go on your own and go calculate the penalty. You can't get your way through that language. It's nearly impossible. When the company sends over the report that's required to actually pay a penalty, there's a lot of back and forth and checks that go on Excel spreadsheets, and oftentimes we find mistakes in that. So what it does do for us is it simplifies the process. In fact, it makes it much easier on the way out of this to actually see where the wet lease is, and you can be the judge of, hey, are they wet leasing more? Does it seem like they're wet leasing more or not? And then it's far easier in future negotiations to say, we think you're leaning on wet lease too heavily. We don't see you growing the airline, so how do you address that? There's 2 pieces in that formula now that you address. You have the lock hours, and you have the actual SPR, the actual penalty. So you can ratchet down the percentage that they can fly. So right now, 1% is penalty free, depending on if they're adding airplanes or not. So it's easy for us to say, you know what, 1% was too much, we're gonna bring that down to a half or a 1/4%. That will be free. On the other side of that equation is you increase the SPR. You increase it and make it really painful for them. The thing is, the penalty payment has never and will never stop this company from wet leasing. In fact, we don't want it to, because what they've done throughout their history is they've made it consistent decisions there with their levers. And they have 3 levers to move when the economics change and the business opportunities change. The first lever is aircraft acquisition. The second lever is pilot staffing, and the third lever is wet lease. That's how this company expands and contracts to meet the demand in the market. We cannot be a static company. We cannot have hard and fast. We don't want to tie the company's hands. We don't want to limit their ability to do that, because guess what? All that comes back to us, and we have a less efficient company, a company that can't make margins, a company that gets targeted, and a company that's non-competitive, and then we're all out of a job. And that's what we have to balance here, is do we put enough restrictions in place, and do we actually allow the company to continue to grow the airline to make us all invested and to have long careers? And I can tell you, that was at the center of our thought. When we looked at this and we evaluated it, we said 2 things. The company's coming after the penalty itself because they're trying to save every nickel right now. And guess what? After all those changes, every single change that they made, whether you talk about the student lines, you talk about the vacation, all those changes that they put that were efficiency changes for them, saving a little bit of money, we still washed them out with our increases in quality of life. We washed them all out. There's not a positive number on their side of their ledger anymore. So, but it was important to them because they had to show some improvement. They have bosses too. They have a board of directors, they have executives that have high demands on them when they walk into negotiations. So that's why they came after it. In our analysis with the NBC, our scope committee chair was, number 1, scope is about jobs. Make no mistake. The most important thing we can do in scope is always ensure and protect pilots' jobs. It's not the wet lease penalty. We know this because if you take every wet lease penalty going back to 2006, that amounts to $6,300 per pilot on average going back to 2006 with the payments that have been made to the association. That amounts to $345 on average for every pilot going back to 2005. If you take out their largest aberration, the most recent scope penalty payment, that amounts to $134 per pilot going back to 2005. That's the totality of those payments. So what was more important to us? That doesn't move the needle on the Starbucks for the rest of the year. So what was more important to us? Was it that penalty payment? And give the company a break on that and say, yeah, we recognize this contract is gonna cost you an excessive amount of money. We're willing to give you a break here because the pilot jobs was far more important to us. And what did we do? We had no idea that the company's volumes were gonna drop off, none. But we said, let's plan on a worst case scenario. What do we know to be true? And what we know to be true is that when volumes drop off, wet leasing dries up, wet leasing slows down, wet leasing stops. We only need to look out at the ramp and you can see the Atlas contract finished. You know that we're not going into this peak without or with wet lease. Done. And why is that? Because it's an additive cost to the corporation. Why would you wet lease an airplane when you already have 400 aircraft worth $28 billion in equipment and other costs sitting on the ramp that can be flown today by FedEx pilots that aren't going full? Why would you bring in one more additional cost? It makes zero business sense to do that. Zero. So I'll finish by saying the wet lease isn't the problem. The volume right now is the problem. All you have to do is take a look at the company's earnings call transcript, and you can see where our volumes are at. And FedEx has to get this business back in shape. We have to get our bottom line back in order. They're cutting out every potential expense, excessive and unnecessary expense to make this company more efficient to deal with the competition. So that's what this is all about. So we don't ever think that scope isn't a big deal. We think it's a huge deal. And we didn't say there's nothing we can do about it. What we said was, we acknowledge the language in there today, and the language is supported by those penalty payments, that when they exceeded those limits, that a penalty was incurred and in fact paid to us. Over the past 2 decades, it has been on 5 separate occasions.
Okay, we've got a question at mic number 2. Sir, we'll come back to your question. We have out of respect for the pilot at mic number 2.